Well, that was a movie.
Hello and welcome back to Simon's Rants. I'm Simon, and today I'm giving my first thoughts on Bottoms, the new film starring Rachel Sennett, who also co-wrote it, along with Emma Seligman, the director. In case you haven't heard about it, you don't know anything, it follows two unpopular lesbian girls who come up with a scheme to get laid. Essentially, their idea is to start an all-girls fight club in their school so they'll get to know the other girls in school, and hopefully that will lead to them actually getting laid by one of them. If that sounds like a weird kind of controversial topic, surprisingly it's not. Seemingly everybody really likes it, but it's one of those things where it's like, well, if you flip the script, if you made it guys starting a club for the sole purpose of hooking up with girls, it wouldn't be a popular idea. That would be something maybe 20 years ago we would have seen a lot of movies like that, but now it's like, you don't want to do that, but now because it's lesbians, it's okay, I guess. Anyway, that aside, the movie's very hit or miss. It's obviously a comedy, so it rides or dies on the comedy, and the comedy is only good half the time. I did laugh very hard at some parts, other parts just had you rolling your eyes, and especially when you see it in a completely empty theater. I was there by myself, there was like two other people maybe. It really just falls flat when there's jokes being said and then there's just empty silence. Right now, it's kind of weird. It's got like a really good rating by both critics and fans. Same thing happened when I went and saw Joyride, I think it was called, the other female comedy, where it's like the critics and fans are saying it's amazing, but it's an empty theater and nobody's gonna go see it. So it's like, I think these ratings are being skewed a little bit because it just doesn't seem real. It doesn't seem like there's actual fans of this movie, and maybe it's just that most people think it looks bad so they don't go see it, and then the few people who think it looks good go see it and actually like it. And then the critics are saying it's good because it's female leads in a comedy, and that's the new thing right now, I guess. But it's not like it's completely new. We've had good female-led comedies before. I've talked a lot about Mean Girls before. I love Mean Girls. I think it's fantastic. And I couldn't help myself but compare this movie to that, especially because, you know, it's a female comedy centered around high school girls that are dealing with the more popular girls. They're unpopular. And I just was thinking the whole time, man, Mean Girls was a great movie, and this wasn't. And like I said, because it's a comedy and it's not funny. It's just not. Part of that also has to do with the lead, Rachel Sennett. I've talked about, I really liked her in Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. I didn't think she was necessarily bad in this, but I think it was a miscast because they talk at length about how this character is unpopular and ugly. And I'm like, it's Rachel Sennett. Okay, maybe you could argue that she's unpopular because she's a lesbian, even though I don't think that that's really a thing. I guess depends on where you are in the country. That may or may not make you popular or not, but she's definitely not hot. Like, she's just not ugly. She's Rachel Sennett, and I mean, she barely looks like a high schooler anyway, but she's definitely, if she was in high school, she would be one of the popular girls based on her looks alone, so that just really doesn't work. I mean, she's hotter than a lot of the hot girls in this movie, so it's like, that just falls flat. The other thing that falls flat for me in this movie is that her character and the other main character are completely unlikable. And it's hard for me to root for these characters when there's nothing redeemable about them. And it's not just that maybe the characters would have some interesting personality quirks or traits to them, but the writing doesn't allow for that. We never get to know any of the characters because everything is so surface level. So the only thing we know about these main leads is that they start a club because they're horny and they're virgins and they don't want to be virgins. So that's all we really know, other than what then develops in the story, and they're kind of jerks in the story. And I know they've got a redemption arc and stuff, but it doesn't really work. So it's hard for me when it's like, you're telling me that there's this loser because she's unattractive, and then you're like, well, maybe she's a loser because she's so unlikable. Maybe that's it, because there's these girls are jerks and all they care about is getting laid, and it's like, I don't care about these girls. Like, I wanted to be invested in them because they're the leads, and also you always root, at least I do, for characters that are losers. When there's main character losers, there's like something relatable about that. I mean, I'm sure there's, to all of the people who are really popular in high school, that's not relatable. They probably relate more with the bullies and stuff, but I don't. I wasn't popular. So I go into a movie and you tell me that there's a loser main character and I'm immediately like, hey, there's a connection point. Let's see how we can relate, because most people think back on high school as, man, that kind of sucked. So let's talk about how it sucked. And then they just lost me because the characters sucked and they weren't well written and we didn't really know anything about anyone. I mean, their entire personalities, every character had one trait. There's this character who's a loser, that's their trait. There's this person who sniffs glue, that's their trait. There's this person who's a popular cheerleader, that is her trait. There's this character who has a crazy mom, that is their trait. And each person has one trait, and that really just didn't work. Once again, I bring up Mean Girls, and it's like, yeah, there was the girl who had the crazy mom, who was just like the cool mom. But one, they developed the mom character. We never learn anything about the cool mom character in this other than she's having sex with one of the football players. That was her one trait. And so it's just so frustrating when the characters are so shallow and there's no reason to be invested in any of the characters. And then, like I said, it's a comedy, so you want it to be funny, and a lot of it just doesn't work. Marshawn Lynch is in this movie, and obviously he's not an actor, he's not a good actor, but he's there to be funny. And most of his jokes were written like, it's funny because it's Marshawn Lynch. If any other actor was saying this, any other person was saying this, it wouldn't be funny. It's supposed to live on the fact that it's Marshawn Lynch doing it. I'm like, well, then it doesn't really work, because that's not how humor works. I know people will laugh at it, but then there's nothing quotable. If you walk away from the movie and you're like, man, I laughed at all those things Marshawn said, and then you try to think of them and you're like, wait, he didn't actually say anything funny, it was just because it was Marshawn Lynch, then it doesn't work anymore, and it makes the movie forgettable. It has to be memorable, it has to be quotable. Comedies, if you can't quote them, aren't going to last in your mind, because you just laugh once and then you walk away. And I definitely laughed at parts of this movie, but there's nothing I'm going to be quoting from this movie. There's nothing I'm going to be thinking about or remembering about this movie other than my disappointment. Because another thing that they did in this movie that didn't work was it took a turn for the hyper-violent at the end, but there wasn't enough of a budget to do that. And so there was quick cutaways from things. Maybe they were scared of being too violent, which also defeats the purpose, but it really felt like there wasn't enough budget, and so they had to edit around things. Like at one point, seemingly they kick somebody's head and it explodes, but they cut away from it and just show people's reactions, and there's like a blood splatter, and it's like, that's clearly because of a lack of budget. They weren't able to do the effect they wanted to, and so they had to resort to a reaction shot with some blood spray, because that's extremely cheap. You can do that shot for $5, you know? So yeah, just disappointing. The main thing that did work in this movie, and I know it's unfortunate because it's like, it's this female-led comedy, it's written and directed by females, and like that's what's supposed to be the powerhouse behind this movie. And then the funniest thing about this movie was the football team. And granted, it was directed and written by the female still, but it's the male characters, and that's why I feel like it sounds sexist when you say like the only good thing was the men. But like, honestly, what the characters in this movie were, the male characters in this movie were satirizing how the world kind of treats football people, like the jocks, and how silly they actually act with their faux macho isms, and just how ridiculous we all just go along with it. And it really seemed like the female, especially the lesbian perspective on watching these guys in tight costumes dance around and then calling that manly. It's like, it's really not. It's really kind of silly, and I love that. I love that interpretation of it. And the guys were extremely overacting and being silly, and I thought that that really lent itself well to that. I thought the directing, writing, and acting was all phenomenal in those bits. But it felt like a separate movie from the rest, because it was like they were staring into the camera when they talked. They were very self-aware, breaking the fourth wall, overacting, and it just didn't fit the mood or style of the rest of the movie. It felt like its own separate thing. So it was good, but it just didn't fit the movie, and I almost wish, actually I do wish, the whole movie was that way. And maybe not the two main characters, maybe the whole thing could have been ridiculous and over the top, and the point could have been these two girls are outsiders, you know, at high school. And that's just like, high school is its own microcosm of the world, and how like things get blown out of proportion and things that aren't important seem important. And if you're not in on it, you can see how ridiculous it all looks. So that could have worked. That could have been a good commentary, and that could have been a good way to show it, is everybody's ridiculous and over the top except for the two leads. But they didn't really fully commit to that. So a lot of this movie falls flat because of its lack of follow through, its lack of commitment on these bits. Overall, it wasn't really wholly that bad. It just wasn't good either. It just didn't follow through, it didn't commit, and left me kind of bored and disappointed. I definitely laughed at some parts, but not enough to redeem it. Like I said, the characters aren't likable, the script is paper thin, and it's just kind of boring and disappointing. So I'm gonna give it a 5, maybe a 5.5, because I did laugh at several parts, especially, like I said, the football guys were hilarious, but I just, you know, the less it focused on trying to be believable and like a real movie, the better it worked. Because when it was parodying stuff, it was funny. When it tried to be a real movie, it kind of felt like a Disney, like High School Musical type movie, like a Disney Channel movie. It just, the budget was bad, the writing was bad, and the acting was, you know, mostly bad. Rachel Sennett, like I said, she's a good actor, but I think she was miscast. Other characters were okay. I like the character Hazel. I didn't recognize her. Ruby Cruz played a character named Hazel. I wish she was the main character, because I felt like she had more development and more interesting things about her than any of the other characters, and she was likable. She actually was interesting and likable. She should have been the main character, because nobody else had those two things. Maybe some people were likable, maybe some people were interesting, but nobody but Hazel was both. So maybe it should have been about her instead. I don't know. I was excited for this movie. The trailers made it look genuinely funny, and it had moments, but it just not high quality. So that's what I did think. What do you guys think, though? If you've seen it, let me know in the comments below, and of course, don't forget to like, share. If you're new here, subscribe. Thanks, guys. Bye.